Okay, so I am Michał and I work here at Visuality. Usually I have presentations about some theoretical or complex topics, and this time I have a really light and easy and chill presentation. But before we start, I need to ask you some questions. Do you use turbo rails on production? Please raise your hand if you do. Rails, turbo, hot wire. Really? Wow. So the next question was going to be, do you like it?
Actually, wait for the answer of the three people, it's not so much.
Yeah, that's great, actually. So, okay, different question. Have you heard about the official hot wire tutorial that is somewhere there in Rails world? And have you done it or started it at least?
I was like reading the ebooks or something like that. They have
Okay, so there is a great tutorial, and I was expecting that you are already using some turbo, and my presentation will be just a recap of the knowledge we all have. But since you don't, maybe it will be really useful for you. So, the topic. Sooner or later, in your Rails application, I'm really sure you will encounter a moment when you have some long-running task in the background. And there is usually a requirement, let's inform a user on the front end what is the stage of this job. Because it takes just too long time, and it would be nice if we can improve this job and make it faster. Let's say what is the stage of the job, and let's see the progress of the job, or maybe the completion of the job. So I'm trying to prove that my topic of presentation will be useful for you. So if you have this use case, how it was done before Turbo, and maybe for you currently, how it's done. So I saw that one of the most popular solutions is the gem sidekick status, which is a really complex gem. There are lots of functionalities, and one of them is exactly this: fetching the status of the job and returning it elsewhere. So this is the code snippet from the README of this gem, and there is a simple API. There is a total, and you specify what is the completion stage of the job, and then in the job you can specify at and the number. And this indicates the progress of the job. So there is already a solution, but there are some drawbacks of it. You need additional gem. You need to know this API. The gem is not so easy. There are lots of more functionalities of it. So you need to go through this README and select the part you need. And it's hard to test. As you can see, there is some additional API which works like magic. There is just total and then add. And if your job is somehow complex and there are, let's say, some services invoked within this job, maybe you need to put those API methods, total and add, inside those services. And I saw this in some projects, and it's a nightmare to debug, to test, and it's problematic. But if you try hard, it works. But we live in a modern era of hot wire, or some of us live. But for sure you know that hot wire consists of three parts: turbo, stimulus, and strata. And we will use turbo and a little of stimulus for more complex stuff. What is turbo? So I also thought that you know that, and probably you do. But the great idea behind turbo is that there is an open channel between front-end client and the server, and we can push updates in two directions. And what we will use is this direction from the database into the server, because this is really useful for us. if we know that something changed in the database, we can broadcast this update into the server and then inform a front-end user. So that's exactly use case that we need. If something is happening on the background job, we want to emphasize that something changed in the database, and then we can transfer this information to the front end. So for the purpose of this presentation, I created a simple application, very simple, that simple, that consists of two models. There is a joke and joke request. And joke request is used to show the intention of fetching some jokes. We will use Chuck Norris API for fetching some random jokes about Chuck Norris. And for example, if you create joke request with number 10, it means you want to fetch 10 jokes from this API with a background, of course. And so from this moment, you will see some random jokes in the presentation about Chuck Norris. Some of them might be offensive, but that's life, it's from API. And probably this is a good moment to present you the agenda of the presentation. So I want to share with you the two ways we can broadcast those updates. And I will also present the third pseudo solution, and also I have a bonus at the end. So the first one, very basic, and something Rust was telling that we should avoid, callback. So there is, if you include Turbo Rails gem in your application, you can use the API that there is provided. And there are methods like broadcast, which means broadcast the change to some open stream, turbo stream. And if we are in the very good position that our job is actually doing something in the database, we can connect the progress of the job with the state of the database. In this case, with the number of jokes that were created. So after create commit, we want to inform frontend that there was some new joke created. The API for this method is like this. The first argument is the name or the ID of the turbo stream. And this is probably the most important thing we need to provide to this method, because it informs where I want this change to be broadcasted to. And the thing we need to remember, this needs to be somehow unique. Because if there are two different users and each of them just created this jokes request, we need to broadcast the change to proper streams. Maybe there are different number of jokes for one user and for another user. So to make it, we can use the records that are created in the database, in this case jokes request, because we know that each joke request has separate collection of jokes. And then there are arguments connected to elements on the front end that we want to affect. So first one, target, stands for the ID HTML element on the page that we will modify. This is jokes progress bar, because we are talking about progress of background jobs. Then there is a partial, and in fact this partial will replace this HTML element with ID jokes progress bar. And we can put some data that is needed for the partial to work. So that was model. On the front end we have a view, and there is first turbo stream from, which says that there is an open connection between server and the front end, and this is the identification of this connection. It's identified by jokes request plus jokes progress bar, and as you can see, that's exactly what we had as the first argument in this broadcast replace to. And we have this element which is jokes progress bar. inside this partial, we have a logic responsible for counting the width of the progress. We just take the number of jokes that are there in the database and the number of jokes that we expect to be in the database at the end of the job. And it should work. So, to sum up, pros, it's very easy. As you saw, it's really that simple. We just add one callback to our model. But there are more cons. So, it's a callback, and we don't like callbacks, of course. It also means, and we experienced that on production, if you add broadcasting in the model, it means this change will be broadcasted or this callback will be invoked whenever this model is changed or created, like in this case. So in test environment, in some other places, your app is creating those records. So this is unnecessary load that your application is creating. And most importantly, you cannot always use this approach. Maybe if you have background job that is not creating records in the database, so you cannot do this in the callbacks. So we can go to second solution. So you saw that we can broadcast from the callbacks in active record model. But we can also broadcast from any other place in the application. And it can be a service, it can be a background job, anything you want. We just need to explicitly say that we are using a method from TurboStream's channel and then use exactly the same method. Broadcast replace to. And as you can see, the arguments are exactly the same. We need to specify to what channel we are writing, what ID element will be affected, what partial we need to render, and what are the data that is needed to use in this partial. So the view wouldn't be changed much, but what we need to change is the partial that is responsible for this progress bar. Because before, we were giving it an active record instance. And now, as we don't want to use active record, we need to count the width of the partial, the progress, based on the numbers. So we need to put numbers to it. We need to give it the number of the jokes, or if we don't create anything in the database, just number of jokes that we just fetch it from the API, and the number that the job will be completed at. So in this solution, we don't have callbacks. We can easily test that because whenever we put this broadcasting, we can always test it. We can test it in the job. We can test it in the service. And we also explicitly say that this service is broadcasting this change. So we don't need to have surprises like if we have this broadcasting in the model. On the other hand, maybe it's a little more work than previously, and also still we need to somehow specify to what stream we are writing. And in the case of this job, it was very easy because we know that we want to write to the channel that is connected to specific jokes request. So we still have some record in the database that helps us identify this channel. But let's say if we have only a button on the front end, and when you click on this button, there is nothing changed in the database. We just want to fetch those jokes from the API. So we don't have this request ID. In such case, probably we would need to add some artificial UID and pass it to the worker and use it in the view to identify this stream channel. It will be harder, but still possible and not so hard. So probably that's a good place to show you a little demo of this application. Alright, so as you can see, we have list of those jokes requests, and we can create a new one. This application is really for experimenting with Turbo. I will give you a link to this repository. And let's say we want to fetch 21 jokes. When we click Save, we are redirected to the show page. And you can see there is a progress bar indicating that new jokes are being fetched. And that's it. I am impressed. It was done without JavaScript. Alright, there are also other things happening, but I will talk about it at the end. Okay, but for sure you have a question. What if we have more than one job? Imagine we need to fetch 100 jokes, and we are prepared for such use case. If there is such a big number of jokes to fetch, we will split it into many workers, many jobs. We will spawn 4 jobs, for example. And each of those jobs will be broadcasting updates to the stream. If we use the existing solution, it will only partially work, because 4 jobs will be writing to the same stream at the same time, overriding each other. So the progress bar there will be stuttering in the progress bar, and most probably it won't complete at 100%. So how to fix that? This is the moment you will need to use stimulus and a little bit of JavaScript, because we need to change the approach of to calculate the progress. Before, we calculated it kinda on the back end. We were giving some numbers to the partial, and the logic was there. This time, we would need to use a different solution. Let's imagine that every job broadcasts the change, but is not updating the progress bar, but is adding just one tiny element to the page. It can be an empty div, for example. And then we can have a stimulus JavaScript controller that is observing this part of the HTML page, and whenever new element appears, it increases the progress of progress bar. So most probably this is the way to go in this use case. And I have also third solution that is kind of not about background job, but it can be also useful. There is a very useful feature of Turbo Frames, source attribute, which means when you load a page and you have a Turbo Frame tag and you provide the source attribute, the Turbo will asynchronously hit the endpoint that was behind this URL and will load it into this place. So we could have, for example, we could have endpoint that is doing a request to jokes API and then renders those jokes. So this service, let's say, downloads one joke from Chuck Norris API, and then it loads just this tiny element to the page, which is a joke. And this will be also kinda asynchronous. It won't be a background job, but it will load some elements, and we don't need any database for that. Also, we can load another attribute to this Turbo Frame tag, loading lazy, which means Turbo will execute this request only at the moment it's needed. So when it's not visible on the page, Turbo will wait. And for example, if the user scrolls down to this element, only then the request will be made. So maybe for some use cases, this is a good solution, but it's actually not about the background job, to be honest. But it's good to know that you can use something like this. And the time for the bonus. So, in this amazing Chuck Norris API application, you saw that when you download new jokes, also pagination updates. And that's much more complex than just the progress bar, to be honest. So here is my recipe how to do it. So when we are adding new jokes to page, we need to decide if this is still the old page or we need to switch to the new page. There is some simple calculation, like in my application there are per page we have 9 jokes. So when you see that the complete amount of jokes is 10, it means we need to go to the second page. And in such case, we need to do following. We need to clear the page, so get rid of all existing jokes. We need to add a new joke, this 10th joke, and we need to re-render the pagination element, because we want this pagination to be consistent with the state of the page, right? We want to have in pagination the full number of pages, and we want to display in the pagination what is the active page. So first 2 steps are quite easy, because clearing this space for jokes means we can just render empty grid for jokes. And also adding new jokes is work the same as there was no pagination. We just add this new cardinal joke. And rendering pagination is a little more complex. We need to re-render the pagination element by providing it the pagination that was regenerated. And it depends on the tool you are using for pagination. I heard that nowadays people are using Pagi. I don't know, but in the README it says that this is the best pagination gem, so it must be true. So this is what typically you do in the controller, right? When you have pagination. So you need to do exactly the same, just providing the actual numbers. So the number of jokes that you currently have and the number of pages that you want to have. And if you have that, then you just pass this pagination element to the pagination partial and it should work. As you saw, it worked, kind of. If you want to read more about it, there is a video, so if you want to watch about it. And there is some blog post that is also extensively describing the issues, how to do that. And there is a repository with this application that I was using to experiment with Turbo. If you haven't made this tutorial from Hotwire, I recommend looking at it first and then going to this repository. But you can also just look at it, why not? And there is also thank you and questions if you have.
Thank you. I guess the third approach you showed could be used for, let's say, this infinite pagination or something like that?
Yes, especially with this lazy loading.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Don't you feel that we return somewhere into the past when we used Rails 3 and returned JavaScript responses to change page?
Yes, kinda, and exactly this feels like this remote true stuff that we were using. Yes, exactly. But now I feel it's a little easier. You can also test it more than previously, and yeah, but still, my experience is I'm in the project with Turbo, and you can use it for very simple use cases, but at the end of the day, you still have to write some JavaScript with stimulus. So, but it's just more convenient, I feel. Okay. Thank you.